Action. Welcome to Paul's Old Ass Movie Classics. We are on episode 12 today, and we got a special one for you. We decided to do, well, before I get into the movie, with me, of course, is Drew Stewart. Drew, thanks for jumping on with me.
Always love to be here.
Awesome. And today, first of all, we want to thank everybody for their support. This has been one of our fast rising podcasts that we've been doing. So we appreciate the love and support of this one. We'll keep doing it, guys. Drew and I love doing this, and we didn't care if anybody else was going to watch this or not, but
we just love doing it, but it's nice if people enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. And again, today we're doing Sons of Katie Elder. This, of course, came out in 1965, and this is directed by Henry Hathaway. And for you movie buffs that know a little bit about Henry Hathaway, he's done a few Westerns that you may be familiar with. He did parts of How the West Was Won. For those that are not familiar with that movie literally took some of the greatest Western directors and had them all make this kind of what's the word? Anthology film. And so I know John Ford also directed that among Henry Hathaway. I believe Howard Hawks, I think, did some of it as well. But he did that. He also did True Grit, which is one of his bigger ones. And Five Card Stud, Nevada Smith. He's done a lot. He's the director of it. The writer is a gentleman by the name of William H. Wright, Allan Weiss, and Henry Essex. And this stars John Wayne, Dean Martin, and George Kennedy. He's the bigger name, so I'm going to say his name. But George Kennedy, of course, from the Naked Gun series for people our age. That's how a lot of people know him. But he's done a ton of Westerns, too.
It's been awesome seeing him in some of these older movies when he's young. He's so good.
Yeah, for sure. And Dean Martin, of course, was part of the Rat Pack. And he's done a few movies with John Wayne. John Wayne, obviously, the GOAT of Westerns. And this got they already say that 7.1 rating on IMDb. Not enough to make like the top 10 of John Wayne's Westerns, but this is I tried to look it up to see what kind of where this movie places for a lot of people, and this did not make a lot of like top 25 of John Wayne movies. But
when you initially said like what movie do you want to watch next, you said let's do underrated John Wayne movies.
Yeah,
I think this qualifies. This is a great movie and nobody talks about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the only reason I saw it because I think it was on Stars a few while back, and that was a big reason why I want to watch it. In this movie, the premise of this movie is ranch owner Katie Elder's four sons are determined to avenge the murder of their father and the swindling of their mother. Basically, the movie starts with them going to her funeral, and then they find out that she had lost their dad had died, and also that they lost the ranch. The dad had lost the ranch via gambling, and that's debated. And basically, everyone's kind of against them, and so it's kind of a us versus them type of a flick. So kind of a solid premise, especially for a Western. And we'll get into more on that, Drew. So box office, the budget of this movie was 6.5 million. This ended up making 23 million, which that's a solid hit for you, especially back then. I mean, that's threefold.
It's a big ROI, as they say.
Yeah. That's why John Wayne was a star, people. And I'm sure Dean Martin didn't.
Dean Martin was no slouch in the box office.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. So Drew, what is your favorite thing about this film?
I liked a lot about it. If I had to choose one thing, I guess one of the things for me that was really unique about it was the fact that, and it actually happens twice, a little bit less with John Wayne, but I'm going to get into it in just a second. The fact that Katie Elder was an incredibly important character in here,
Yeah.
and she was dead the entire time, and there was nobody played her. Yet I felt like I knew her better than a lot of characters in other movies that are physically present the entire time. And I really thought it was unique and interesting the way they went around kind of those vignettes towards the beginning when the brothers all get into town and they're going to go settle their debts. And they realized that not only did she not owe money at the store, but they owed her money because she had dresses there, and she had already taken care of her own burial. And you really got to know the type of person that she was through these anecdotes and the true reverence in which all of the townsfolk talked about her. And it was juxtaposed then with these kind of four knucklehead brothers. Anyway, I just thought it was a super unique way of introducing her, even though we never got to see her in the flesh. And I really felt like we knew who she was. She's the namesake of the title. I really thought that that was interesting and clever and well done, and really got to know her well. And additionally, they kind of did that a little bit with John Wayne at the start. It's
Yeah.
like, did that man get off the train? And like, who is that? And like, everybody's scared of this guy showing up. They're making preparations for him. They're getting the guns out and all this kind of stuff, just at the threat of the fact that he may show up because it was his mom's funeral. And
Yeah.
then you see him far up on the mountain, and then you start to get to know him. So I really liked how they built anticipation. I really liked how they built characters in this. It was great.
Yeah, I agree a lot about everything you're saying. What I liked about this film, one, I'm just gonna say I love the music. This one, this had the real classic Western that we kind of know of. Like when you think of a Western soundtrack, like this had that.
It was
And
Bernstein again, right?
I don't know off the top of my head, but that probably was.
Mm.
But it's the guy that done most of these Westerns for John Wayne. But fun fact, this movie was actually made. He just had lung cancer, and he had it removed, and so this was like him kind of getting back on the wagon, and that part I think is cool. And this is actually based the fun the kind of the not the final fight scene, but the major kind of ambush scene was also kind of based off of a real life situation with the Marlowe brothers. But I I I thought the script itself was pretty solid. I don't think it was necessarily 100% what perfectly executed, but I love the setup of it, like you're talking about. I love like nobody really likes these brothers, but you can kind of see them have, the different relationship. Kind of remind me a little bit of and it was just kind of spoke about, but remember in Saving Private Ryan when he talks about like him and his brothers having fun, back at the barn, like it kind of they reminded me of the Ryans in a weird way, even though we never saw them, but
Right.
that's kind of what Matt Damon was describing in that movie. And so I thought they did a good job there. And yeah, I really just like how they built the characters and really developed this great place for the story to kind of move. You know what I mean? Like, and I thought it moved decently. I didn't think it was a perfectly paced film, but it moved decently. The only thing I would have, the only thing I think I wish I would have done better is there's really no action at all in the beginning. And I feel like it almost could have I don't I'm with you. I didn't want to necessarily see Katie Elder, but if either have a scene of showing George Kennedy's character and show like how much of a badass he is, or the death of the father. But because I think the opening scene where they're all waiting on the train, I love that as the introduction to the Elder family. But I just felt like it could have used some action before then, because it just took a little too long to get into the action. And it's like we're watching an action movie. Like I don't know how you feel about that, but
I don't disagree. Like, they built up like the threat of it early on, like at the gun shop, at the Hastings, Arms Depot or whatever that was. But yeah, it
yeah,
didn't pan out for a while.
yeah. I mean, I'm gonna kind
I
of
think the
combine.
first action was like the brothers fist fighting almost.
Yeah, something crazy like that. Look, so what the movie reminded me of, and I'll just kind of jump into this because it's going to make my point, but it kind of reminded me of Tombstone. And in Tombstone, they have that kind of cool intro, and then it goes into we see who the cowboys are and why they're such a menace. Then we see the Earps, and I feel like it could have used a similar model because we don't really know how badass they are, the enemy. And I think it would have added, I think, just more to the story if we kind of went that route. because a lot of this time I'm just like, man, there's a lot of similarities. You got the four brothers. It's a story of this of these brothers that they're not necessarily always on the same page. And Tombstone had a very similar dichotomy, and I thought that was great. They weren't just these fun-loving brothers that just got along. They all had their personalities. They weren't best friends. I actually enjoyed the fist fighting scene. I thought that was kind of
It
cool.
was awesome.
Yeah. The
It was a
this
little hard to believe they were brothers. John Wayne's like 70 post cancer,
I know, right?
and the youngest is like 20 maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely you definitely have to lose a little bit of a suspension of belief there.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's definitely like a 60s brothers thing, but it always seems like the youngest anybody that's between the ages of like 15 and early 20s, they always have this just like whiny, bratty kind of like personality. And it seems like every Western movie has that. If they have a young character like that, like that's the only way to portray them. Like none of them are ever
Even
tough.
even Dennis Hopper's character in the other family is that way.
Yeah. Dennis Hopper's the son, right?
Yeah, he's like the young son, and he's like all
He gets shot at the end.
get off my property, and but then
Yeah.
like puts on the bravado when his dad gets there. Like
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's just I
it's
mean,
weird. It must be a trope I never thought about.
yeah. Um, what does this movie hold up? I mean, I think we kind of answered it, but
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
think so. I think it's well made. It was Elmer Bernstein. I think that the music was great. I think that the cinematography was good. Felt like the sets were good.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about this before. Like when you get into the '60s and the westerns, it starts to feel a lot more realistic in a lot of ways. Like the sets got
Yeah.
better, and the acting got better in a lot of ways.
Costumes are better.
Yeah. So I
Blood
think
still sucks, but
what does?
blood still sucks, but
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not perfect, but um it definitely holds up, and it had action, though I agree it built slowly. The character development I thought was, as I mentioned, like probably the highlight for me. It was really, really good. Good actors, and it had some comedy, like
yeah,
Dean Martin's scenes when he's always trying to like get one over on people, like the scene at the bar with the fake eye, like that was a great
yeah,
scene.
that was a great scene.
Unexpected, and it was a great scene.
Yeah.
So I think it holds up for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think Dean Martin is what was perfectly cast in this because of that juxtaposition he adds to it, and George Kennedy as well. I think added so much. I kind of wanted to see more of George Kennedy and wanted to see a little bit more of why he's a badass because they don't you can tell he's a badass, but they don't really you don't
He
really
never
ever get
gets
to
to
see
show
it.
it.
Because he got beat up by John Wayne, so John Wayne's a badass. But you never see 100% like his best, and I think that's why that opening scene with him, I think that would have just made it a little bit stronger because he kind of I didn't even kind of like how he went out too. It's like oh, kind of left the movie a little too early, I thought, but
Agreed.
I would have just wanted to drag him. Again, I just think he's such a great actor. I would honestly milked a little bit more, or or either that or just that moment could have been brought up a little bit more to where it's just like they kind of do it just I think it could have been done a little bit tighter, but just like oh shit, we just lost our best guy, and they didn't they kind of did it, but not really. Like I would just made it more of an emphasis because it changed the tide in that little battle, and I would just like to see that emphasized a little bit more where there was the music, maybe different shot selection or maybe he just gets injured and then gets killed, but it was just I'm trying to think of the movie. It might be Tombstone, where he gets shot in the fore. Oh yeah, it's Tombstone with Michael Bain, where he gets shot in the head, and then he kind of does that like dramatic little crawl. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't realize he got shot in the head until like when he was already on the ground laying, and they showed the blood. I mean, obviously that might be a technical thing that they couldn't really pull off, but that threw me off a little bit. I was like, oh, he got shot in the head. I was like, oh, all right. that's my point.
Yeah.
It's just like it's just weird. I don't know. But again, we're also dealing with the 60s. So um did you have a contemporary comparison for this?
You kind of already mentioned it. Like I mean, obviously they remade it basically with four brothers. Um, but I thought that
Not a
for me,
Western, or do you mean the
it,
movie one?
the movie Four Brothers, I think, is like an homage to this.
Oh, really? I didn't know
Yeah. With Marky Mark and
that.
um those guys. Uh, I thought Tombstone also. You know, it's hard for me to unlink the Western piece, right? So like, there's the Western, it's the brothers. They're going against a rival gang, and so instead of the Hastings, it was the Cowboys. So for me, and partly just because we had just watched it, and potted about it, but for me, it was Tombstone, and it was '90s, so it falls nicely into our wheelhouse of contemporary.
Yeah, you're actually 100% right, Drew. It is based on Henry Hathaway's The Four or the Sons of Katie Elder. So if you haven't seen that movie, guys, Four Brothers that came out in 95, I believe, directed by John Singleton. Um, 2005, excuse me, came out 2005. But that's a solid movie. I remember seeing that one. And
Yeah,
so now that you say it, it's like, oh yeah, like so that's definitely spot on. That's contemporary comparison.
yeah.
Should this movie be remade today, and who should it star? I I I, I can answer this one first. I would definitely say this should be remade. Um, who should it star? That's tough, but I think going either like a Christian Bale, or I would want to go younger brothers, because obviously I don't want a 70-year-old. Because the mom would have to be,
I think I was exaggerating. I think he's 60, but he was old
yeah, yeah, yeah. He looks old. Um, but yeah, the mom would still be 80 in the
in
60s
the
or 1860s.
1800s. Yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely go like a Christian Bale, or yeah, let's just go Christian Bale, because I loved him in 310 to Yuma. Or even if you went like the blonde route and you went like Ben Foster, and you know, I would love to see like, no, I don't know if he'd be able to hold, like Ryan. I feel like Ryan Gosling.
I feel like Ben Foster could do the Dean Martin role pretty good
Yeah.
because he has
Oh
that
yeah, for
tone.
sure. Yeah, yeah, he has that tone. You just need another like kind of blonde guy to be the brother. Um, but yeah. Um,
You mentioned Christian Bale, and we talked about him every once in a while, never like as a centerpiece to any of our conversations. There may not be a more diverse actor, an actor with more diverse capabilities
yeah,
working today than that guy. He's amazing.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and he was also in the movie Hostels. And so
That was such a good movie.
he's one of my favorite contemporary Western actors, because I feel like the old generation, obviously like Kevin Costner, you know, he would have been great for this role 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, Robert Duvall is one of the great Western actors. Tommy Lee Jones. So some of these guys, but they're obviously aged out of this
I,
group. I feel like Christian.
I would run Chris Pine and Ben Foster together again as brothers, like and have
Oh,
them
there
have
you go.
they're awesome in that
Now
movie.
you're talking. I can believe Chris Pine as the John Wayne.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I would
He's
have to look at some other blonde actors, but I like that.
maybe one of the Hemsworths.
Yeah, you can do like a Luke Hemsworth.
Yeah. Liam?
Uh, say it
Luke?
again. Well,
Isn't it
there's
Liam?
there's both. Yeah, there's Liam and
Well,
Luke.
there's Chris.
Well, Chris is the oldest. Chris is Thor.
There's three of them.
Yeah, there's Liam and Luke. I think
Wow.
you're. I think we are. I think I did mean to say Liam though. Liam was the one in a
Yeah,
Land of Bad.
Liam.
Yeah, but yeah, there's multiple Hemsworths.
There's lots of Hemsworths. Anyway, I think Chris Pine and Ben Foster running their back as brothers would be awesome.
Yeah, I like that. I'd sign me up for that movie. Awesome. Well, let's get into our top five 1960s Western movie. This was probably the toughest category I think we've had on this podcast. I struggle with it. Why don't you go ahead and give me your number five?
Well, you struggle. I've had a hard time with a lot of these. You struggle with this because you are a big, big Western guy.
Oh yeah,
I
I even cut
I'm
some out,
getting
but
more and
I had
more,
like 8.
thanks to this podcast, I'm getting more and more into Westerns, and I can't wait to watch our next one. And but
Yeah,
so for me, number five is one that we've done on this podcast recently. Is and I have to admit, like I'm partial to some ones that we've done recently.
yeah.
El Dorado. I
Oh,
really like
nice.
that. John Wayne, Robert. I just thought Robert Mitchum was so good in that movie.
Yeah.
Um, I really liked it.
Yeah. So when I created my list, I felt like I had to give myself filters because, just so I wouldn't skew too heavy on one direction or the other. And I
Yeah,
definitely could have easily filled these out with 5 John Wayne films because I
for
think
sure.
my favorite John Wayne time period for Westerns. So that would have been very easily, very easy to do. But so I decided to kind of diverse it up. So one name I wanted to make sure I got in here was Clint Eastwood. And so a lot of people would probably put Good, the Bad, the Ugly, but that's actually not my favorite film. And we talked about in this podcast, I loved Hang 'em High because it kind of had this combination of the spaghetti westerns, but then it was Americanized and it didn't have the terrible dubbing session. And so I went with Hang 'em High here because I really did enjoy that. And I wanted to make sure Clint Eastwood has to be on this list. And that was my favorite of the 60s. We mentioned Joe Kidd, but that was in 72. But yeah. So that's my number 5. My number 4 is this is a movie I want to watch again, but I've seen it a couple times, but especially now that we're watching a lot of these older ones, I just want to watch it again. But when you're talking about film history, this is a very significant film, and this was one of the first real kind of dark westerns, and it took the genre kind of in a different direction. And so I wanted to give it a shout out to that. But it's The Wild Bunch, and yeah, this is on a lot of people's lists when it comes to story and technique, everything. And so I wanted to give it its due. So that's my number 4.
Cool. I agree with you. Clint Eastwood had a bunch in this decade. The spaghetti westerns are great. I was wavering between the good, bad, and the ugly, but I also ended up with Hang 'em High at number four. I really, really enjoyed that film.
Yeah, same here. I can't wait
He
to watch.
was so cool in it. Like he's cool always, but he was so cool in that movie.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I'm going back to John Wayne for number three. And I'm going with one of the more iconic characters, Rooster Cogburn, and True Grit.
Nice.
Tail end of the '60s, but it's a great, great movie.
Yeah, for sure. I would have loved to include Troy, True Grit. Normally I would have, but like I said, I wanted to kind of diverse it up a little bit.
I
Um,
don't have quite as much diversity in my uh no, seriously. Like I would have liked to have done what you've done, but I had to kind of stick to some of these greater hits because I haven't seen as many of
yeah,
these
that's
as you.
fine. These are still, I mean, there's no bad list here. My number 3, I went with more of what what it just meant overall for cinema. And this was, like, I talked about it earlier, but this was an anthology series with some of the best actors, directors, and just filmmakers in general. And it's How the West Was Won. And if you haven't checked that out, it's an awesome. It's one of the kind of a full scope of the American frontier and people moving out west to settling to the gold rush. Like it kind of incorporates all of this. They've redone it since then. There was also a series called American West, I think it was called, that kind of did the same thing. So this is now today it's called a miniseries, but back then they didn't have miniseries. But this was
Right.
actually a theatrical miniseries. But it's a really excellent, like I said, collection of some of the best artists and all that stuff. So I wanted to give a shout out to that.
I've never seen it. It's going on the top of my list.
Yeah, it's awesome. I want to watch it again. My number 2 is we've talked about it a few times on this podcast, and it's to me known for its sound design and how a movie can be so effective without even a word of dialogue. And it's Once Upon a Time in the West. It's one of it's just I just absolutely love this film and how this is Sergio Leone. And it's not really considered a spaghetti western though, right? Or is it? I don't think it is. Yeah,
I don't think so.
I think it's one of his first like American films. But this is just excellent film
Yeah.
technique and everything, and it's obviously considered a classic. Now it's you.
That's your number two,
That's my two. Yeah. So you do
or is
two.
that your number? What was that for you? That
That
was
was
yours.
two. Yeah, that was my number two.
So for number two for me was The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Hmm.
Um, Jimmy Stewart in an unusual role for him.
Darling.
In in a western. It's been a few years since I've seen it, but I remember really liking it and respecting it, and it's kind of an interesting one. So for me, Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and then number one is your number two. Once Upon a Time in the West is one of those. It may not always be the most fast-paced film. It doesn't have some of the more classic tropes of a sort of the Western genre that we would expect at the time. But in terms of important turns in filmmaking, this is absolutely one of them. Sergio Leone is a master in this. And I think I said it in our last one when we did Valachi Papers.
Yeah.
Charles Bronson and the way he's filmed, the way all of them are filmed, and the close-ups that happen in here, and the, like you said, the absence of sound
Yeah.
other than the nature around them, while the camera is bringing to the viewer all of the emotion you can imagine without words.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful film. It's impressive in its ingenuity and its uniqueness, and I think it's just an amazing film in the '60s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we pretty much flopped because my number one is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. This is John Ford. This is John Wayne. This is James Stewart. This is peak John Ford,
Yep.
and he's considered the greatest Western director of all time. And I think this movie really is. I think this is his best overall film, where it combined. I feel like the Searchers. Let me rephrase that. Searchers is like his best film, but that was made several years earlier. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance kind of builds upon that, and obviously lenses get better, coloring, everything gets better with when time passes.
Yeah.
Liberty Valance, I believe, is like 8 or 9 years later, and so it just with technical advancements, it's just a better quality film. But The Searchers is obviously his greatest film, and so this is again just peak John Ford. It's a great film. If you haven't seen it, there's a famous quote from that movie. Um, if what was it? I just know the last part is print the myth,
I
right?
don't. Yeah, I don't. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I don't remember.
His autobiography is listed on it. Um, when if the myth is better than the truth, print the myth or something
Print
like
the Myth. Yeah.
something like that. Hold on, let me look this up. When legend becomes fact, print the legend.
Yeah.
The print the legend is like that's what is his autobiography name. So, anyways, this is 94 Metascore. Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I believe it's his highest rate. It had 8.1 on the IMDb. And it's also won a few Academy Awards. This one, this was nominated for Best Costume Design. Yeah, that was the only one it was nominated for. But it's a Western, so that's pretty impressive. So, but yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for us here, guys. Thanks again, Drew, for joining us. Next week on tap, we decided we haven't done a lot of military films, and it's kind of I saw it a long time ago, so I don't remember it at all. And Drew has not seen it all, but it's called The Bridge on the River Kwai. This is David Lean. This is considered one of the greatest films of all time. They talk about this a lot in film school,
Yep.
screenplay, everything. This movie is seen everywhere. So if you guys haven't seen this is a great one to jump on, and you can see it now on AMC Plus if you have that. You can also rent it with the other thing. It's also on the Criterion Collection channel if you have that. So it is available for free if you have those subscriptions. If not, you can rent it for $3.99 off the other one. So thanks again, Drew, for joining us. Appreciate
Always.
you. And with that, that is a cut. Thanks, guys.